Hello everyone, today in this short video we're going to be reading a story which is known as Grace Darling. It's a story of a woman named Grace Darling who became famous by surviving a stormy night. It's based on a novel by Tim Vickery and illustrated by Ashley Mims. And before reread this. It was 1833. Off the northeast coast of England, in a little wooden boat, Grace Darling and her father were on an angry sea in the dark night, with huge waves all around them. The wind was screaming in their ears. They were trying to reach a rock. On the rock were cold, wet people who went crying for help and fighting to stay alive. Their ship, the Forfarshire, was broken in two. Could Grace and her father save them? This is the true story of Grace Darling, a girl who became famous for being so brave on that stormy night. Chapter 1: The Forfarshire. Daniel Donovan was a passenger on the Forfarshire. He was a young man, about 30 years old. He stood on the deck of the ship and looked at the sea. It was difficult to stand on the deck because the wind was so strong. The ship was moving up and down uncomfortably, and Daniel felt ill. Then a big wave hit the side of the ship, and salt water flew into his face. "The wind is getting stronger," said a passenger beside him called Mr. Rob. "And it's getting darker, too." He was a tall, dark man with a black coat. He didn't like being at sea very much, and he looked worried. "Yes," said Daniel. "I can't see the land now." He looked to the west, but he could see no land and no lights, only water. Big gray waves with white tops, which went up and down, up and down. "But the Forfarshire is a good modern ship," said Mr. Rob. "Nothing can happen to a new ship like this. Listen to those fine, strong engines." Daniel looked down at the big paddle wheel on the side of the ship. It went round and round, down under the white water, up and again, under the water and up. Then he looked up at the black smoke that came from the Forfarshire's funnel. "Yes," he said, "they're good, strong engines." But he was not really sure. He was an engineer, so he knew about engines. Sometimes the Forfarshire's engines made strange noises, and the paddle wheels went round slowly. Then there was a crash, and they went quickly again. Daniel was not happy. A seabird flew low across the white tops of the big gray waves. Daniel watched it and felt wind and rain on his face. Then a door opened behind him, and a woman screamed, "Simon, come back! Come back at once!" Daniel looked behind him and saw a small boy. He was running across the deck. He was only 5 years old, and the wind was too much strong for him. He fell over the deck and started to cry. Then another big wave hit the side of the ship. The white water came onto the ship and carried the boy along the deck. "Help!" the woman screamed. "Save my child!" Daniel put out his hand and caught the boy's coat. Then he carried him quickly back to his mother. "Quick! Get back inside, out of the wind!" he shouted. He hurried through the door and closed it with a crash. "It's too dangerous for children out there." "Mr. Donovan," said Mrs. Dawson suddenly, "what happened to the engines? I can't hear him now." "Can you?" Daniel listened. "She's right," he thought. "The engines have stopped." He could hear the noise of the wind and the sea, but not the engines. "You're right, Mrs. Dawson," he said. He stood up and ran to the door. "Excuse me, I... But then he opened the door and his words were lost in the wind. Outside, he looked up at the ship's funnel. There was no smoke above it. He looked over the side of the ship at the big paddle wheels. He watched them for 2 minutes, but they did not move. And all the time, the big gray waves lifted the four-flusher up and down, and white water fell on the deck again. "What's happening?" shouted Mr. Robb. "Why aren't we moving?" "The engines have broken down," shouted Daniel. "This isn't a sailing ship. It can't move without its engines." A big wave hit the side of the paddle wheel and sent white water over their heads. Some sailors were trying to put up a small sail, but the wind blew it out of their hands, away across the sea into the night. "There are women and children on this ship," shouted Mr. Robb. "It's nearly dark, and the weather is getting worse. What can we do?" Daniel looked at him. "I don't know, my friend." He shouted back, "I can't do anything, and I don't think anyone can help us now." And that is the end of the story of Grace Darling. And now let's read one more story. It's another story called The Merchant of Venice. We're just gonna wait. And there it goes. It's a book by William Shakespeare and illustrated by Jerome Brasseur. Our story starts many years ago when Venice was a very rich and important city. In those days, lots of Venetian ships crossed the Mediterranean Sea to North Africa and the East. Venetian captains bought many beautiful things abroad, and they took them back home to sell in Venetian shops. One of the most important men in Venice at that time was Antonio, who was a very rich merchant. Antonio had many friends in the city of Venice, but his best friend of all was Bassanio. He was a handsome young man from a good family, but he wasn't rich. When Bassanio's father died, he left Bassanio only a little money, and Bassanio had spent it all. Antonio, the merchant of Venice, was a kind, good friend to Bassanio. He gave money to the young man to help him when things were difficult for him. Bassanio wanted to marry Portia, a young Venetian woman from a good family. Portia was good and beautiful, and because her old father had also died not long ago, she was a very rich young man too. Portia was the old man's only daughter, and her mother had died when Portia was a young child. So Portia now had all her father's money, and she lived in an enormous house in the country. Because of this, lots of young men visited Portia to ask her to marry them. From England, Scotland, France, Germany, and Naples they came to Portia's house in Belmont. They went there with many servants, and they gave her lots of expensive presents. Bassanio didn't have enough money to do this, and he felt miserable about that. For the time being, Portia had not agreed to marry anybody, but Bassanio was worried that she would soon be tired of saying no and would say yes to somebody. So Bassanio went to ask Antonio for his help. Antonio was delighted to see his young friend. "How are you?" he said with a smile. "You must tell me all about this young woman that you want to marry." So Bassanio told Antonio about his plans. "I think that Portia likes me," he finished. "And if I can visit her wearing beautiful new clothes, with lots of servants and lots of expensive presents for her, maybe she'll agree to marry me. But I have no money left, So could you lend me some more money to help me visit Portia and ask her to marry me? If I don't do it soon, I'm worried that some rich man will go there before me and ask Portia to marry him, and that she'll agree to it. Smiling, Antonio answered his friend. Bassanio, I'd love to help you, but I've got no money right now. All I have is in my ships at sea. One has gone to Tripoli, another to Lisbon, a third to England, a fourth to India, and a fifth to Mexico. Now I'm waiting for them all to return. When they do, I'll be 3 times richer than I was before, and I can give you all the money that you want. Then he saw the sad look in Bassanio's eyes, and feeling sorry for the young man, he said, Don't worry, my friend. Because you need the money now, I'll borrow it from Shylock and give it to you today. I want you to marry Portia and be happy. Shylock the moneylender was very rich. He lent money to people and made them pay back more than they had borrowed. He loved money more than anything, more than his family and more than his friends. But he wasn't a very popular man in Venice, and he didn't have many friends because he was so mean. He hated spending money on things. He wasn't even kind to his only daughter, Jessica. She never went outside the house, and Shylock's house was always very cold inside. His wife, Leah, had died years before, so Jessica did all the housework for her father. She cleaned and cooked, washed, and tidied for him. Her father never said, "Oh, thank you," to her for all her hard work. He didn't give her so much money or food to eat. And he never bought her any new clothes. So the poor girl had to wear her mother's old things. Shylock hated Antonio because Antonio sometimes lent money to friends for free. And this was very bad for Shylock's business. So he was waiting for the right time to hurt Antonio if he could. That afternoon, Antonio went with Bassanio to see Shylock. He asked the moneylender if he could borrow 3,000 gold coins from him. "When all my ships come back to Venice, I can give you your money back," he said. "I often don't lend money, and I never borrow money for myself. But Bassanio, my best friend, had asked me for help when I don't have any money to hand. So I'd like to borrow this sum for you, if you agree." At first, Shylock wasn't happy with the plan. "What will happen if all your ships cross dangerous waters and sink in storms at sea before they return to Venice? You won't have the money to pay me." Then he had an idea and smiled. "Look, let's be friends," he said to Antonio. "I'll be glad to lend you this money for free. You're a kind and generous man, and I want to show you that I can be as kind and generous as you are. But as a joke, I've got an idea, and maybe you can agree to it. My idea is this: if you can't pay my money back and I won't lend you on time, you must pay me a pound of your flesh, and you must agree that I can cut it from any part of your body that I want." Bassanio was worried by this joke, and he didn't feel comfortable with Shylock's plan. "Shylock wants to harm you. Don't agree to this," he said quietly in Antonio's ear. But Antonio laughed, saying, "Don't worry, my ships will come home safely and on time, and I won't have to give Shylock a pound of my flesh. You'll see." So Antonio, Shylock, and Bassanio went at once to the moneylender's office. There, Antonio signed a bond that said Shylock would lend him 3,000 gold coins for 3 months, and that he would give Shylock a pound of his flesh if he couldn't pay him back on time. After that was done, Shylock put the gold coins into Antonio's hands. Thank you so much for watching. See you on next time. Bye, guys.